When I found myself seated among such remarkable minds, scholars, historians, and theologians from across continents, I realized that this was no ordinary exchange of ideas. It was a rare opportunity to engage with the essence of Islam, not as a subject of political discourse, but as one of civilization's most profound moral and intellectual forces. What struck me most was the honesty that filled the room. There was no pretense, no effort to please or provoke, only a genuine desire to understand. We spoke of how Islam, through its philosophy, architecture, and science, had illuminated the world at a time when much of Europe lay in shadow. The scholars spoke not defensively, but with a quiet confidence born from centuries of contribution to human progress. I listened, deeply aware that the West has too often forgotten this shared heritage, allowing misunderstanding to replace admiration. The discussion peeled away the noise of modern politics and revealed the soul of a faith rooted in knowledge, compassion, and balance. It was, I must say, one of those rare moments when dialogue transcends its boundaries and one feels, even for a brief instant, the presence of something enduringly true about our shared humanity. For many years, I have found myself drawn, almost instinctively, to the profound beauty and order within Islamic art and architecture. There is something remarkably contemplative about it, an elegance that speaks not merely to the eye, but to the soul. I have often said that within those intricate patterns and geometric harmonies lies a reflection of the divine order itself, a visual language of unity that transcends culture and creed. My fascination has never been political, nor driven by momentary trends. It has been deeply personal, born of a sincere respect for the spiritual depth that Islamic civilization embodies. When one stands before the arches of the Alhambra or listens to the call to prayer echo through an ancient city, one cannot help but feel that humanity has, in its finest moments, reached for something far greater than itself. It is in that striving, that exquisite balance between the material and the spiritual, that I see a lesson for our age, a reminder that faith, when expressed through beauty and understanding, becomes not a divider of worlds, but a bridge between them. Such reflections have, for me, always been a quiet source of learning and profound inspiration. It has long troubled me that so much of the Western understanding of Islam has been shaped by narratives of conflict, politics, and fear, rather than by any genuine effort to comprehend the faith's inner spirit. During the debate, as I listened to scholars speak with remarkable clarity and grace, it became painfully clear that what the West often perceives as Islam is, in truth, a reflection of its own misunderstandings. Too frequently, we examine a civilization of over 1 billion souls through the narrow lens of geopolitics, forgetting that at its heart lies a faith of discipline, compassion, and profound moral balance. The conversation revealed how easily societies can become prisoners of their own perceptions, mistaking cultural expressions or regional practices for the essence of belief itself. I was reminded that Islam, like all great spiritual traditions, calls humanity toward humility, stewardship, and harmony, a message that resonates deeply with anyone willing to listen without prejudice. Yet, in much of the Western world, this message is drowned out by the noise of suspicion and stereotype, as though faith were a threat rather than a guide. What struck me most was that every misunderstanding, every careless generalization, is not merely an intellectual failing, but a moral one, a failure to see our shared humanity reflected in another's devotion. The debate reminded me that when we strip away the distortions of politics and media, what remains is something profoundly unifying, a call to virtue, to order, to respect for creation itself. Perhaps that is why the discussion left so many in silence. It was not Islam that stood exposed, but our own inability to see it for what it truly is, a civilization of faith, grace, and astonishing depth. When one begins to study the great tapestry of human civilization with any seriousness, one cannot help but encounter the extraordinary legacy of the Islamic world, a legacy that, astonishingly, so few in the modern West seem fully to appreciate. The very foundations of mathematics that guide our technology, the methods of observation that define our sciences, the principles of medicine that sustain our hospitals, and the philosophy that shaped our moral and intellectual frameworks, all bear the imprint of Islamic civilization. It was in the libraries of Baghdad, in the observatories of Damascus, and in the universities of Cordoba that the light of inquiry was kept alive, while much of Europe lay in the shadows of the Dark Ages. Scholars such as Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina, and Averroes did not merely preserve the knowledge of Greece and Rome, they expanded it, refined it, and handed it forward to a world not yet ready to comprehend its brilliance. And yet, even today, we speak of progress as though it were born from one continent, one culture, one people. I have often felt that to forget this heritage is to commit an act of historical amnesia for our modern age. Its architecture, its science, its very language of reason is in many ways built upon the intellectual generosity of the Islamic world. It is perhaps one of the great tragedies of our time that this truth is not more widely taught or celebrated. To acknowledge it is not to diminish the achievements of Europe, but to recognize the shared continuity of human thought, the great dialogue of civilizations that has always defined us. For in those centuries of learning and creativity, one finds not only the genius of Islam, but the very spirit of humanity striving toward understanding, harmony, and light. There was a moment quite unlike any other that I shall never forget, a moment when the very air seemed to grow still, as though time itself had paused to listen. It came not from an argument won or a clever remark, but from a simple truth spoken with such sincerity that it reached beyond intellect and touched the soul. One of the scholars, a man of quiet demeanor, spoke of Islam not as a system of rules or rituals, but as a message of peace, peace with oneself, peace with others, and peace with the Creator. He described how the very word Islam is rooted in salam, meaning peace, and how every act of true faith must begin with an intention toward harmony. He said that in the eyes of the divine, humanity is one body, and when one part suffers, the whole is in pain. The room fell utterly silent. I could see in the faces around me, politicians, academics, journalists, that something had shifted. The noise of ideology, of centuries of misunderstanding, seemed to fade, and for a fleeting instant, everyone simply felt the weight of that truth. It was not a silence of awkwardness, but of reverence, as though the walls themselves had absorbed a long-forgotten wisdom. I remember thinking how extraordinary it was that in a world so obsessed with division, it took a few words of faith to remind us of our shared humanity. The scholar went on to speak of how Islam's call to unity is not confined to one nation or race, but extends to the whole of creation, urging mankind to live with purpose, humility, and balance. It was, I think, at that very moment that everyone in the room understood, not in theory, but in spirit, why this faith has endured for over 14 centuries. For it was not political power or conquest that made Islam spread, but the quiet conviction of peace, the strength of mercy, and the beauty of order. That silence which followed was not emptiness. It was the sound of understanding dawning in hearts long clouded by prejudice. And in that fragile stillness, we all seemed to hear, if only faintly, the echo of truth that has always bound us together as human beings. In the days that followed the debate, I found myself reflecting deeply on how the media chose to portray what had transpired, and I must confess, I was neither surprised nor entirely disappointed, merely reminded of the age we live in, where truth must compete with spectacle for attention. The conversation, which to those of us present had felt profoundly human and illuminating, was soon reduced by many outlets to a handful of headlines and selective soundbites. The deeper essence of what had occurred, the honesty, the vulnerability, the genuine yearning for understanding between faiths, was almost entirely lost amidst the noise. Some publications twisted the discussion into a political narrative, framing it as a controversy rather than a dialogue. Others, perhaps fearful of offending sensibilities, downplayed its significance altogether, as though silence were somehow safer than sincerity. What pained me most was not the criticism, for that is inevitable in public life, but the absence of curiosity, the unwillingness to engage with the true spirit of what was said. Here was a rare moment of mutual respect, of shared reflection on Islam's moral and spiritual contributions to our world, and yet it was filtered through lenses clouded by bias and impatience. I thought then of how modern media, with all its power to connect and enlighten, so often becomes a mirror reflecting only what it wishes to see. It trades depth for drama, nuance for narrative, and in doing so deprives the public of the very thing it claims to serve, understanding. There was, I felt, something profoundly tragic about that. For while the cameras captured the faces and the microphones caught the words, they missed entirely the silence, the sacred stillness that followed the realization of truth. That silence was the story, and yet it found no place in the reports that followed. And so, what might have been remembered as a turning point in our collective conversation about faith and coexistence became instead another fleeting headline buried beneath the noise of the next day's outrage. It was then I understood that our struggle is not only against ignorance, but against distraction itself. The inability of a hurried world to pause long enough to recognize wisdom when it stands before it. In the course of that profound debate, a subject emerged that I have long pondered myself, the question of what it means to live a truly fulfilled life, and how that quest is understood so differently in the Western world compared to the spiritual traditions of Islam. There is no denying that modern Western society, with all its remarkable advances, has become increasingly enamored with material success, wealth, status, consumption, as though these were the ultimate measures of happiness and purpose. Yet, in this relentless pursuit, there seems to be a growing emptiness, a subtle but pervasive sense that something vital has been lost. The scholars spoke eloquently about how Islamic spirituality offers a contrasting vision, one rooted not in accumulation, but in submission, not to material desires, but to higher principles of justice, compassion, and self-discipline. They described how true fulfillment in Islam is found through balance, the recognition that the soul requires nourishment as much as the body, that community and family matter as deeply as individual achievement. It was striking to hear how Islamic teachings emphasize humility and gratitude, reminding believers that life is transient and that one's purpose extends beyond personal gain to encompass service to others and harmony with creation. In that moment, I could not help but reflect on the profound difference between a culture that measures success by what one owns and one that measures success by the strength of one's character and devotion. The discussion illuminated for me that spirituality, far from being a relic of the PAs, offers a vital remedy for the malaise of modern life, a way to reconnect with meaning beyond the superficial, to find peace amid chaos, and to live with intention rather than impulse. It was a humbling reminder that while the West has much to offer the world in science and innovation, it could learn from the enduring moral frameworks of Islam about what it truly means to flourish, not merely survive. Throughout the course of our conversation, I found myself reflecting quietly on the profound ways in which Islam, as a living tradition, preserves certain moral frameworks that seem increasingly fragile or even absent in much of the modern Western world. It is not a matter of judgment, but observation, a calm acknowledgement that the values which underpin family, discipline, and a clear sense of purpose have long been pillars of Islamic life, sustained across centuries despite immense challenges. I could not help but notice how, in many Western societies, the rapid pace of change and the prioritization of individual freedom sometimes lead to a loosening of those very bonds that give life meaning and stability. In contrast, Islamic teachings emphasize the centrality of family as the foundation of community and society, where responsibilities are shared, respect is cultivated, and the wisdom of elders is honored. Discipline, too, is not seen as a harsh imposition, but as a path to inner peace, whether through prayer, fasting, or daily acts of self-control that fosters resilience and focus in the face of life's inevitable trials. Above all, purpose in Islam is understood as a higher calling, a divine mandate to live not merely for oneself, but in service to others and the Creator, imbuing every action with meaning and direction. This reflection, I must say, was not a criticism of the West, but a recognition of the universal human need for such anchors in a world that can so easily feel adrift. It is, perhaps, a reminder that different cultures may excel in different ways, and that in Islam's preservation of these enduring moral frameworks lies a lesson for us all, one that encourages humility, respect, and a willingness to learn from the wisdom of others. As I sat there absorbing the depth of this tradition, I was struck by how much richer our shared future might be if we allowed these truths to guide us more often than the fleeting distractions of the present. When the debate was broadcast and made available to the public, the response was nothing short of extraordinary. Millions of people tuned in, their reactions spanning the full spectrum of human emotion, from shock and disbelief to genuine inspiration and curiosity. What struck me most was how deeply the conversation seemed to resonate, not simply as a political event or a moment of intellectual sparring, but as something far more profound. A human encounter that stirred something real within the hearts of those watching. Social media was alight with passionate commentary, some voices expressing skepticism, others grappling with the challenging perspectives presented, and yet others openly acknowledging how the discussion had shifted their understanding of Islam and its place in the world. There was an undeniable sense that, for many, this was not just another televised debate, but a rare occasion to confront preconceived notions, to question long-held biases, and to engage with a faith tradition in a way that felt honest and unfiltered. Even those initially resistant found themselves drawn into the conversation, compelled by the sincerity and depth displayed by all participants. It was as though the debate had opened a door, one that many had kept closed out of fear or misunderstanding, and invited the world to step inside and see the complexity, the beauty, and the humanity that often gets lost in headlines and soundbites. I recall hearing stories of individuals who, after watching, reached out to learn more, to connect with Muslim communities, or simply to reflect more deeply on WHO and it means to coexist in an increasingly diverse world. This wide-ranging reaction underscored to me that despite our divisions, there remains within us all a hunger for truth and connection. The debate became more than an event. It became a catalyst for dialogue and reflection, a moment that transcended politics and touched on something universally human, the desire to be understood and to understand others in return. What I found most remarkable about that debate, and what lingers in my thoughts even now, is the unmistakable sense that it was never truly about winning or losing, about scoring points or dominating a conversation. Instead, it was about something far more profound, the pursuit of understanding. In a world so often consumed by the cacophony of political rhetoric and partisan division, it was a rare and precious occasion when the truth managed to rise above the noise, clear and unadorned. The participants, scholars, leaders, and thinkers alike, were not engaged in a battle of supremacy, but in a collective search for insight, for recognition of shared values and mutual respect. This alone sets such moments apart, for it requires humility and openness that are all too often in short supply in public discourse. The debate illuminated how deeply entrenched misconceptions can be dismantled, not through confrontation, but through patient dialogue and genuine listening. It reminded me that the power of faith, any faith, lies not in coercion, but in its ability to inspire reflection, compassion, and a sense of purpose beyond oneself. When the conversation touched on Islam's teachings about peace, justice, and community, it became clear that these ideals resonate across cultures and traditions, serving as common ground upon which bridges can be built. The silence that followed some of the more profound statements was, I believe, the sound of truth echoing louder than politics, louder than fear or suspicion. It was a moment when the veneer of conflict gave way to the enduring human need for connection and understanding. Such moments are fleeting, yet they remind us of what is possible when we set aside our differences and engage with one another honestly and respectfully. I came away from the debate with a renewed sense of hope, not because all questions were answered, nor because all divisions vanished, but because a space was created where dialogue could thrive, where barriers could be softened, and where the dignity of every participant was honored. In these times, when so much seems fractured and contentious, that is no small thing. It is a reminder that beneath the surface of political agendas and media spectacles lies a deeper current of shared humanity waiting to be acknowledged. This debate was a testament to the power of that current, a moment when truth did not shout to be heard but whispered to be felt, inviting us all to listen more closely, to speak more kindly, and to seek understanding, not victory. It is my hope that we carry that spirit forward, recognizing that the greatest victories are not those claimed on a stage or in a headline, but those won in the quiet chambers of the heart and mind, where understanding grows and peace takes root.